Awesome. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Renee Angela Mock. You have joined Mentor Maryland DC today for the return of our professional development series, which I'm so excited to be here and to be doing this again with you all. And so many folks registered, so many folks are already here, which to me says that folks in Maryland and DC and beyond are committed to high quality services for young people. And today we are using the resource Becoming a Better Mentor: Strategies to be There for Young People, which is an evidence-based, research-based document that guides mentors on how to be better, how to be there for young people, right in the name. Which I'll put the resource in the chat, which you can access anytime. But today we'll be discussing chapter 2, which is about practicing cultural humility. If you're not already familiar, Mentor Maryland DC, that's us. We are an affiliate of the National Mentoring Partnership. So myself and Mentor Rhode Island, Mentor California, Mentor Texas, we are across the US trying to galvanize the mentoring movement and ensuring that there are enough mentors for young people and enough high quality mentoring programs, right? Professional development. Some of you have engaged in technical assistance. This is about ensuring that we are living up to evidence-based practices and we are doing our absolute very best for our young folks. So I know we are in WebEx, which is not as familiar for folks, and I appreciate folks, trying something new. It's not always easy. So towards the bottom of your screen, you should see where you can mute yourself, where you can turn your video on and off. You can raise your hand here and you can react with an emoji. So feel free to send an emoji, find that, send something in the chat if you haven't gotten there yet, just so you are as familiar as possible. You'll also see where you can see who else is here. I see Kathleen got it. You can see who else is here, and you can also open the chat. When you do open the chat, you can send an emoji, send a gift. You can tag someone if you know someone in the chat and want to communicate directly with them. For Slido, as I mentioned, you'll go to slido.com. You should see something like this where you'll enter the code. Today's code is BBM. And when you do, you will see this. It says welcome. You're here. You're in the right spot. You'll enter you should enter your full name. For the polls, you will be anonymous, so you won't be on blast. But this is just, again, so we can track participation. So enter your full name, join the Slido, and then it will match any polls that we're working on. You'll be able to see there. A little bit about me. I don't want to spend too much time on me. I know many of you are familiar with me. I actually just this week hit my 5 years at Mentor Maryland DC, so I'm sure I'm familiar with many of you and vice versa. And for those who are new, it is great to meet you. But it's me. This is also my 20 years in nonprofits and youth development. 20 years ago, I got my first job at a Boys and Girls Club that I worked at during college, and eventually that ended up being my first full-time job when I graduated college. So my entire career has been in nonprofits and youth development and showing up for young people, mostly on the front lines, until 5 years ago when I came to Mentor Maryland DC and moved into a capacity building role for helping mentors, helping mentoring programs do their best work for young people. So these are just a few things about me. I'm also a master trainer in mentoring practices. So I'm credentialed as well to facilitate becoming a better mentor. So I hope I'm as credible as possible to bring this content to you. I'm not going to get too much into our community standards. These have been long-standing standards of Mentor Maryland DC when we are in learning spaces together. Hey, Lonnie. So feel free to review that. But what I am going to ask you for in this learning to really show up today, and what I know is our most prized possession, right, is attention. And it is the biggest gift that we can give to each other, to give to ourselves. So I hope that you will be able to, show up with your full attention, close away some other, things that are tempting to work on, emails, other kinds of tasks, to really show up for your own learning, right? To show up for each other, because this session is as much about me sharing information with you as it is about you sharing information and with each other and me. I learn from you every time I show up in a PD space. So we are able to give each other as much attention as possible today. I would really appreciate it. And I don't ask that lightly as well, but I'm here to give my 100% attention to you. So as much as we can share with each other, I think would be great. In this Slido, you will also be able to reach our Q&A. So feel free to join that and drop any questions there. Those will be questions that we'll address more at the end. You can drop a question in the chat at any time, and I do have the chat open, and I'll continue to respond to questions there as much as possible. And if I'm not able to respond, I might ask you to go put it in the Slido so we can follow up. But again, this is an interactive session. Keep the chat lively. Raise your hand when you have a question. Please share and feel open to sharing, and I will share as well. Again, a mutual kind of sharing. But this, again, depends on your participation, which is why it's also a requirement for the Credly badge if you saw my email. So I've facilitated this session for the past 4 years, and we are kind of in a different place when it comes to the context for which we are talking about this topic, practicing cultural humility. So when I feel like I need to reconnect with a concept or idea, I love to go to Merriam-Webster, to go right back to the dictionary to be like, do I actually know what this means? And challenge that. So I wanted to go and see, what does humility actually mean when we think we're just looking at humility, which it's being defined as freedom from pride or arrogance, the quality or state of being humble, of course. So we are in a time right now where it may feel like there's not that much humility going on in the landscape of public figures, of our politicians, of the folks we're interacting with online and otherwise. And I think that makes this challenging as well, as it relates to cultural humility and the rollbacks that we've been seeing as it relates to things like DEI, inclusion, cultural acceptance. We are in a space right now where folks of certain identities are being targeted by hate, to be as frank as possible about it. And that is what we need to be taking into consideration when we are talking about practicing cultural humility today. And what we know for sure, and research that's in this chapter that has told us, is that when young people with marginalized identities are interacting with adults who do not acknowledge when racism has taken place, when hate has taken place, those young people felt like those adults did not care for them. So it's not that the adults were saying racist things or things like that. It's simply the absence of acknowledging that these things are happening made those young people feel like the adults were not caring for them. So what we know, and what I can already say is that the practice of cultural humility, which is to engage with the culture of the young people that we're interacting with, is meaningful for our young people and shows that we care, and includes acknowledging the things that are happening out there in the real world for our young people. And so we're going to jump right into what is cultural humility. We talked about humility, and now we're talking about cultural humility. Could someone read the definition on the screen, please?
Cultural humility is an ongoing, lifelong process of self-reflection and learning about how social identity and experiences are shaped by systems of oppression, power, and privilege.
Great, thank you so much. So, by definition, cultural humility is something you have to practice. And what do we know about practices? It's something we continue to do forever, right? It's not something we achieve and we've done it. It's a practice we have to do. And today we're going to talk about how to practice it effectively within the context of youth development and our relationship with young people. But in the definition, we see social identities, right? So what are social identities? Social identity is a person's sense of who they are based on their group membership or memberships, which can reflect physical, social, mental characteristics, and can be self-claimed or ascribed by others. So we're going to go deeper into social identities in just a little bit. But as we talk about what cultural humility is, I also want to be clear about what cultural humility is not. And in the age of DEI rollbacks, I want to make this quite clear that cultural humility is not cultural competence. Cultural competency is something that maybe you've already been to a training about. I know I definitely have been in years past, but cultural competence assumes mastery. It assumes that there's an end point in learning. And this attitude could lead us to be overconfident in our relationships with young people. I like to reinforce nothing should humble us more than young people. Let young people humble us. And thinking that you have mastery over another culture can make you believe that everyone in that culture is the same, can lead to stereotypes. Cultural humility is not colorblindness. Some Americans growing up believed that seeing race is a form of prejudice and discrimination, and even mentioning a person's race is racist in itself. This I don't see color kind of colorblindness that we've likely many of us have interacted with, creates discomfort around the mention of race and around individuals who are racially different than us. We talked a little bit about how young people feel when adults in their lives don't acknowledge color and racism going on around us. So acknowledging race and racism is the first step to connecting with a young person of color, with a young person who is different than us, or may have an identity that is being marginalized currently in society. And then the case for it. Why? Why should we do this? I hope I'm already selling it, but what is the case for practicing cultural humility and mentoring? And we'll use the phrase mentoring because, I see in the chat, many of us are from mentoring programs directly, but functionally, many of us are serving as natural mentors in young people's lives, young people that we interact with, whether we're a staff member, whether we're an aunt or uncle, whether, we're a neighbor. This is about building intentional and supportive relationships with whoever the young people are in our lives. So know that we're speaking to everyone when I use the word mentoring. Yeah, I really am speaking to everyone. But why is cultural humility important when we're in relationship with young people? And one of the great things about mentors is that, we got research for everything. And research shows when a mentor is practicing cultural humility, it can lead to higher quality mentoring relationships, as well as the positive fostering of youth, ethnic, or racial identity, particularly for BIPOC young people. So young people who may not have mainstream opportunities for representation or opportunities to explore their own identities. And then cultural humility can also help mentors overcome barriers in a relationship with a young person, especially when mentoring a youth of color or a youth from a different background. So I want to be clear that there is still cross-cultural exchange and therefore cross-cultural mishaps with mentors and mentees of the same race or ethnic background. And we'll talk a little bit more about those intersections in a little bit. But when we think about a cross-race matched mentor and mentee, we need to remember some youth of color naturally have cultural mistrust toward people outside of their race, particularly white adults who are in positions of authority. And we can easily imagine the reasons why. The historic discrimination experienced by people of color in the United States, because youth of color directly experience racial discrimination from adults in their lives, shopkeepers, police officers, teachers, school staff, right? And so do their friends and family members have those experiences as well? So having some mistrust, these young people having some mistrust of adults in their life, it's not necessarily a bad thing because it can help youth protect themselves from biased treatment, but it can also create a barrier that white mentors need to overcome in that mentoring relationship. And I know not everyone on this call is white, right? Again, this applies to everyone because we're going to find out just how different we are from young people. But for our white mentors, it is even more important. To put it simply, research suggests that mentors are not attuned to cultural differences with their mentees. Their mentor relationships often end early, and mentor relationships that end early harm young people. To be frank about it, and can have young people take on the identity of why did this mentor leave me? Why did our relationship end? And therefore, cultural humility may help mentors overcome mistrust in their relationships with youth in a way that strengthens those relationships and helps them to last longer. Okay. We are going to get into the social identity wheel, and we're about to get into our first activity. So I want us to get deeper into the multitude of social identities that we all have before we talk more about how we're going to practice cultural humility. This will give us some more context from some more context of information for when we are working on building and strengthening our mentoring relationships. It's always important to begin with ourselves and to strengthen our self-awareness. I always say we bring to young people the lens of all the culmination of our experiences. And if we don't reckon with what those experiences are, we may end up projecting, our crap onto young people. So this is where we're going to start some of that self-reflection. And self-reflection is a huge part of practicing cultural humility. So this is the social identity wheel. So these inner circles are just some of the kinds of categories that you might think of kind of firsthand when it comes to social identities, the things of who we are, while the outer circle and rainbow are an even kind of broader, more specific kinds of social identities. As you can see, there are so many things about us, so many different things about us, so many cultures that we participate in, so many elements that make up the depth of who we are as individuals. So for our first activity, and this will be an individual activity, I'm going to turn on some music. I'm going to pause our recording. And I'm going to ask you to draw or fill out your own social identity wheel. So you're going to write your social identities across the circle with your name in the middle, right? You can use a pen and paper, do it digitally, Google Draw, MS Paint, however best works for you. And your wheel doesn't need to exactly match or include every single identity that's on the screen. Of course, there's quite a bit here, but I'm going to ask you to think of at least 5 to 7 identities of your own, more if you'd like, right? See which ones come to mind as you think about this idea of what are the things that make me me, right? What are my identities? What are my experiences? No one else is going to see your wheel. You will not be forced to share it, but we will be getting into discussion on the next slide. So I want us to spend a few minutes working on your wheel, and then we'll get into discussion on the next slide. Are there any questions? Let's come back together. And before we move into our discussion on the next slide, I just want to ask, what was the experience of filling out your wheel? How did it feel to do that reflection on the things that make you you? Feel free to come off mute or drop in the chat. What was it like to spend time thinking about that?
So this is Kathleen. So I'll answer. I actually enjoyed doing it, and I find it interesting because I started my career as an educator, so I have also gone through cultural competency trainings before, but
Sure.
I found it easier today
Mm,
than, you know, 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. I don't know if it's just because I'm in my early 50s and it's like I know the answers now. I don't have to think so
yeah.
hard, but it wasn't so scary today to do that, you know?
Yeah. That's so
Um,
interesting. And I think that's a question you can think about a little bit more, right? What was the context of when you were doing this however many years ago? You are
right,
different, right? More
right.
self-actualized, I think, to say the
Yeah,
least. But what was the other context for which you were filling it out? Where was the world at, right? What were we talking about?
right.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Thank you so much for sharing, Kathleen.
Yeah. Oh, you're
Yeah,
welcome.
lots of good ideas in the chat. Tracy said it was liberating. Love to hear that. Jennifer realized what parts of my life are the most meaningful to me. Great. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. I enjoyed realizing how much I knew about myself. Motivating. I had to tell myself not to write these things. That is interesting. Certain categories were easy. Others were more challenging or harder to narrow or define. Yeah, I found that as well, right? When you write down one thing about yourself, it makes you think about kind of some other things and what does that really mean? Revealing. It was challenging, confronting to acknowledge that I'm the definer of my own identity. Oh my gosh, yes. You guys are brilliant. Okay, so we're now to ponder some questions together, and I'm going to put you into breakout rooms to do this. So I'm dropping the questions in the chat, but we'll go over them on the screen as well. So I want you to think about, and there's going to be 5 questions. You don't have to talk about every single one in your group, but again, this is just to kind of spark conversation. So thinking about, and some of you kind of addressed this already in the chat, but what is the identities of yours that you think about the most often? What do you think about the least often? Maybe why is that, right? Is there something about yourself you want to know more about? Which identities have the strongest effect on how you perceive yourself? And then what do you think have the strongest effect on how others perceive you? So I've dropped those questions in the chat. Make sure that you can see them. I'm going to break us into rooms to talk this through. And I'm going to make the groups a little on the smaller end. So, pardon me. So everybody has a chance to share since we have a few questions. Okay, we're gonna about 4 people per group. Let me pause our recording really quick. Dawn, So yeah, tell me about what happened. What came up in your group? Which of these questions really sat with you or in your conversation? Feel free to come off mute or write in the chat. How did you answer some of these questions? What came up in your conversations? Feel free to come off mute or let me know in the chat. Cool, Karen. What identities are you thinking about the most, the least? What do you want to know more about?
So in our group, we started talking about how one of the things that we hear, some people said the most, and then some was the least. So it's like answering by both of these questions. Was the religion. And we discussed about how it all depends on where you are located and where you are as to whether or not that's something that's heard or talked about a lot. So yeah. And then we started to get on a really good topic that I wish we had a little more time, is critical thinking, and how a lot of people are being judged by critical thinking. Well, not judged. For instance, you're held at a higher expectation to have critical thinking, but over the years we're noticing that that's not something being taught, but it's tested, and based off of someone else's thinking, it could be perceived or scored differently. But I'm supposed to be able to think outside the box, and this is my rationale of how I think it is, but yet I'm scored low because it wasn't on your standard. So
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing, Victoria. So many great things that you brought up. Right, perception, right? How our thinking perceives how we interpreted this wheel, how we look at someone else's identities, how we interact with our own identities or somebody else's as well. We also talked a little bit about kind of the intersection of some of these identities, right? So that because I live here, being this thing makes it like this, right? It makes me more religious, less religious, or makes this more important or less important. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, Danielle, I see your hand up.
Yes, so for having the chance to go through the list, the thing that stuck out to me on number 3, I just wanted to get maybe a little bit more insight, because your own identity you would like to know more about. And so I wrote down creed and functional specialty, because when I don't know what is something I would consider a creed that I could have referenced, or even a functional specialty. Maybe I just want to clarify.
Yeah, I wrote functional specialty. I should have identified, because even when I was looking at this, like, what does that mean? At first, like your work specialty, but this idea of creed too, which is a word we don't say as much as I think maybe we used to, or maybe socially speaking, as far as like, is this as important now that people are sharing what their quote unquote creeds are? What does that really mean? And again, that could be generational on whether that's important to us or whether that is even a part of our identities at all. It's not to say that like every single thing on here is very important to every individual as far as what makes up their social identities. So I think that's important as well, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a little bit, about how that relates to our mentees and their experience with their identities. Somebody wrote in the chat, we discussed how certain aspects of how identity may be influenced by how others perceive us. It's important to maintain an understanding of what our identity means to us personally. True, right. So this whole perception piece as well, how are other folks' perception of us disrupting our own perception and experience of ourselves and our identities? Ideally, no. But I think we know, especially being a young person, that might be different. Yeah, any other thoughts or reflections from your group discussion? I'm glad that it was so fruitful, and I'm sure it could have gone on for a very long time in my experience doing this training. That this is very ripe for opportunity. So, is it your name pronounced Jane? Please let me know in the chat. But the age gap between
Janie.
Janie, got it. So Janie's saying the age differences in her group played a factor in how they answered the questions. Yeah, totally. And I think that is important too. Well, identities do change over time, but our relationship to the different parts of our identities change over time by who we are and how much experience we have and what's important to us at the moment as well. So this whole experience, and Kathleen, who mentioned doing this multiple times, right? It will be different each time you do it because you're in a different place. Every day we grow and we're a little bit different than the day before, right? And as years and years pass, we may be quite different. Not even our identities being different, but our relationship to our identities and the context of our identities as well, which is what we're going to get into a little bit next. Thank you so much for participating. I hope y'all made a friend. Keep in touch with your group for more conversations. But we're going to go into now how this is going to apply to us practicing cultural identities into our relationships. So there are certain things that we always have to remember when we're in relationship with our young people, particularly that there will always be an age-based power differential between you and the young people you work with. So even in a peer mentoring situation, usually it's a near peer, right? There's maybe just a little bit of age difference, but there is still a power differential between the mentor and the mentee. So how might an age-based difference be a power differential in a relationship? How might that impact your relationship with your mentee?
They may not think that we know what we're talking about or that we can relate to them.
Yeah, right. Just as
I
a
think
young
sometimes,
person. Oh, go ahead.
oh, I'm so sorry. I was going to add, sometimes the
Please.
age differential can kind of cause this adultism, where
Yep.
I think that's the word for it, where we
Yeah.
just feel like because we're the adult, we naturally know more
Yep.
than the young people that we're serving.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much, Lex, for bringing that up. This whole concept of adultism, which is a whole other training, right? But the ism of adults being prioritized over young people, which I mean, I say all the time is that young people generally are disempowered and disenfranchised socially in our society, nationwide and worldwide, right? Adults are more important. We have certain lenses that our society looks down at young people, and that would be adultism. Another thing to whoever was sharing before, but this idea of young people looking up and being like, you can't relate to me and things like that. When you are young, especially, we go back to the identity wheel, age might be the most important part of your identity because people are reminding you all the time that you're a kid, you don't have control over your life, you don't get to decide what you get to do, you have to answer to your teachers, your parents, your coaches, right? So age is likely to be way more important to a young person because they have so much less control over their life than when they're in a relationship with someone who's older, however that age gap may be. So that can have an impact. I thought I saw a hand up. Someone raise their hand? Feel free to come up,
Yes,
sir.
this is Trina
Yeah,
Carter. One of
yeah,
the
please.
things that, as a mentor of multiple programs, that I've learned to even be careful with is not to try to be a parent in a way that they see us like all the other adults. Because I've even had one mentee mention, like, hey, I just need somebody to support me and encourage me and help me. I don't need another parent. And
Totally.
as much as we have good intentions to try to lead and guide them, it's how it's said and done and
Mm,
demonstrated that they don't feel parented from everybody.
right. Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for contributing that. Such a great point. To be a mentor is different than to be a parent, right? And mentors are particularly unique because often, while the adults in young people's life are hopefully have the same goal of, a positive life for this young person, parents, teachers, coaches, extended family, neighbors, while all those folks are hoping on the same page, the mentor relationship is different and unique in that we are we get to sit back a little bit as a guide, and we are there not always asking things of our young people or asking them to do something or putting pressure on them or asking things of them, right? Homework, chores, all those kinds of things. And at the mentor, we can be there just for that support piece that you're saying that the young people were asking of you. So acknowledging that the mentoring relationship to be a mentor is a special and unique thing. And therefore, we have to show up in a certain way, even if we're friends with their parent, we're the same age as their parent, we can relate more to their parent than to the young person. So keeping all those things in mind.
Renee, might I add?
Yes.
Okay. It's just like a extension of what Karen put in the chat. that young people may also assume we have all the answers.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, and definitely just wanted to share um, my own personal experience with that, just with adults
Nice.
when I was younger, and knowing like young people have so much wisdom, right? And are so aware of what's going on, and really sometimes more than adults, oftentimes more than
Yes.
adults. Yeah, because they're just pure coming at it from such a pure stance, a lot of the time, an unadulterated stance.
Yeah.
But
Quite literally. Yeah, that's
right,
good. That's good. That's good.
yes, and yeah, I know for me as a young person, I learned over time to discredit my own knowing and wisdom because my thought processes were, well, the adults know better. You know, they should know.
Right.
They're not going to tell me anything
Exactly.
that's wrong. And they tell you, adults will tell young people that too. We won't steer you wrong. But sometimes you inadvertently, we're doing that. So just wanted to speak
Yeah.
on that. And then like the importance of us as mentors and um, I don't know, companions to young people as they're growing to like
Yeah.
really create the space to honor their wisdom and listen to their
Yeah.
wisdom.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. And I'm totally gonna steal unadulterated. That's such a good use of the word that's like almost a pun, but it makes so much sense. No, that's really good. And I think what I was about to say. Oh, this piece of when young people are like, well, I don't know better. That's that internalized adultism, right? It's that like I don't have power, I don't like my thoughts are important, I don't know what's best for me, and I have to defer. That's the adultism going the other way. And I think that is really important. And I tell the story a lot of kind of how I met my natural mentor. Is that I was in that space, right? I was like, I have no power, young people can't do anything, like very disenfranchised, even though I was a very privileged young person. I had all the privileges in the world, but I did not view myself in this way of having any power or agency because of the messages that I was getting from the adults in my life. And then my natural mentor showed up and asked for my help. And I was like, whoa, this adult is asking for my help. I was like, what? And I think one of the most powerful things that we can do for young people is to show that adults are fallible, adults do make mistakes, to own up to our mistakes and make them right. So yeah, so many great points made there, and that just come from just that one part of our identities, right? Just the age gap we're talking about, right? And there are so many other parts where there may be power differentials when we are facing our own social identities and putting cultural humility into practice that we need to consider, right? Ideally, cultural humility can help disrupt saviorism, another training that we do, combating white saviorism, but give space for youth voice, which I think Toshima just made a really great case for. But what I want us, we're not going to spend time answering this question, but to think about, right, do I have space at if I'm mentoring through a program, if I'm running a mentoring program, to practice my cultural humility, to consider my own identities, how that puts me in a relationship with my young person identities, and who they are. Justin said this session makes me appreciate my mentors from times past. Good, helps up. That's awesome. Okay, keeping moving. So this is another image that we refer to as the cultural iceberg. So this visual differentiates what we can see about each other versus the depth of who we are and the things that influence our thoughts and actions. So you'll see some of those social identities, here across the iceberg, and you'll see some other things as well. But at and above the waterline of visibility, above the water, are the things that purportedly we could see about someone, right? Just by looking at them without being in a relationship with them. But also, I would say, in my experience, I've had all of these things pardon me, all of these things above the water mistakenly wrong about me, where people have assumed the wrong race, gender, and age of myself, right? So these are things we assume that we can see and know just by looking at someone, but even that I would kind of challenge as well. Whereas what we do know, all these things below the water are things we have to be in relationship about to get to know someone more. So we want to be careful about those assumptions. So you'll see some social identities below the water, and you'll see some other things like communication styles, right? Talents, gifts, work styles. And maybe when we get into relationship, we'll learn about how some of those social identities influence that person's communication, those person's gifts, those person's work styles. So for the practice of cultural humility, we really want to cultivate our sense of curiosity and explore one another's life experiences and or otherwise all that's below the surface here, right? We want to build on our genuine desire to learn about others, and it requires us to acknowledge that our culture and experience in life can be very different from someone else's, right? The cultural norms that you have grown accustomed to in our life may or may not align with those of our mentees have experienced, right? Maybe all of these things above the water, besides age, we do have in common with our mentee. But look, there's all these other things about us that could be different. And we have to be in relationship and be curious to get to know them to really be truly practicing cultural humility and making the most of our relationship. When we're in conversation with our mentees, we want to make sure that we are checking for understanding, right? What may seem obvious to us may not be obvious to someone else who is different than us. And this will help, you and your mentee be on the same page and be able to learn about where each other are coming from. So ideally, mentoring relationships are bidirectional. When we practice cultural humility with a young person, we're modeling it so they can practice it with us as well, right? And cultivate their own curiosity. The other thing I want us to remember is that social identities can be dynamic, right? Our youth are still growing and finding out what their identities are. We should not consider their identities finite, and we should be open to identities changing, their identities and our identities as well, right? Those of us who may have done this activity 10, 15 years ago, it might be quite different. I assume many of us in this room, when we reflect on these things below the waterlines of when we were the age of our mentee or when we were teenagers, how those things have changed, right? I can't even think about what my quote unquote working style was when I was a young person versus it is now. Feels totally unrelated, right? So we want to acknowledge that these things are dynamic and be open for our young person to develop and change, but to really be able to guide them along the journey of doing that. We want to be in relationship and giving that space. Practicing cultural humility gives our young person that space to explore their own identity and become who they are, who they're meant to be, right? Okay. So one of the critical actions that we can take to effectively practice cultural humility is this self-reflection piece. So this includes things like asking questions and exploring the ways that you define yourself, which we kind of just did in that social identity activity, right? And taking a step further, what do those identities mean in the context of the power structures here in the US? But then go make it a little bit smaller, right? What's the context of your identities in your community, in your neighborhood, in your mentoring program? What do those things mean? How might those influence, again, power differentials, which we talked about, but how might they just influence the perception of those as well? So being mindful of those things and the curiosity to figure that out. Another part of reflecting part of your identity is that you may feel pride about certain parts of your identity, right? And that can be very positive. But cultural humility means acknowledging that you believe some parts of your pardon. Well, so when we think about practicing cultural humility, and we're thinking that some of our ideas, some parts of our identity are very positive, we want to be sure that we're not hitting the line where we are assuming that some parts of our identity are superior to other groups, right? Which we can get to on certain parts of when we reach that line, the line between pride and humility, which we talked a little about, or arrogance and humility, which we talked a little about when we were defining what humility is. We want to check ourselves a little bit when we are at this kind of prideful point. Are we going over the line? Are we able to still hold humility for identities that are different than us while still having pride in who we are? We want to, think carefully about how our social identities may affect our interactions with our young person. You and a young person in your program, and we've talked about this a little bit, might be similar in race, but different in economic background or in sexual identities. Perhaps for you, your racial and gender identities are the most meaningful parts of how you perceive yourself and your experiences. But for your young person, perhaps their sexual identity is the most meaningful part right now anyway, right? And that may influence how they perceive you and themselves and understand their own experiences. So by getting to really know our young people and what's important to them, this context can be revealed to us and can help us approach those relationships with more intention. And what we know for sure is that engaging in this critical self-reflection, you will be ready and more open to learning about your youth experience. And I want to acknowledge that engaging in this kind of reflection, I think some of us may have had this experience doing the social identity wheel and talking more about it, but it can bring up, uncomfortable feelings, anger, shame, guilt, fear, sadness, as we're really, again, considering our identities, what that means in the context of power in the US and wherever we may be. So those kind of feelings are normal, right? Part of the self-reflection process around social identity, around oppression, privilege, but it's important that we explore those feelings further and sit with them again so we don't end up projecting something onto our young people. Okay. Here we go. So talked about reflecting, and of course, we've said the word learn 1,000 times so already in this section, but learning, of course, is a really important part of practicing cultural humility. We have to learn about our young people, let them tell us who they are, and then go deeper into learning about what they tell you, right? A young person shares that they're neurodivergent. You may not know what that means. Great, go find out, right? Be that curiosity piece. A young person that told me something about themselves, I got to go learn about that thing so I can better understand my young person. And then, and if when you are invited, participate in your mentee's culture. This is, again, that opportunity to be curious, to not lump all of our kids together if we work with a lot of kids, and to treat them as individuals, which they are. We want to engage in a process of asking questions and learning about our youth social identities and how systems of oppression, privilege shape our youth experiences. So a way that we can get really good at asking questions is something like motivational interviewing. So motivational interviewing, which includes things like active listening, it is a way to be in communication with someone, to be communicating that you care and are truly listening about what they are saying, to reflect back what you are hearing. This is a skill. I think some people are naturally better at it than other people, and that is fine. But what we also know is that it is a skill that we can build. So there is, thankfully, and thank you, Mentor, for this, a new tool, training tool, all about motivational interviewing. And I'm about to drop that link in the chat. This is a full-on toolkit. If you run a mentoring program, you can download the guide on how to use this toolkit, put your mentors through it. If you're an individual, you can go through this training on your own. If you are interested in Mentor Maryland DC facilitating this training for you, let us know. We'll add it to the calendar. But again, motivational interviewing is a really, really key skill that communicates to young people that we care about them, about what they're saying, about who they are. And this is the how-to of how to do that and be really good at it. There's also so much research about motivational interviewing, etc. But being really good at it can make us really good at this practicing culture humility piece. So I want you to give you that resource. Again, if this is a topic for a future training that you are interested in, please let me know. But what we know, for real culture humility to be in practice, it'll be necessary for us to have these kinds of conversations and to be ready to be in those conversations, particularly if our young people have not really had the space before to explore their own identity, right? They'll need effective communication, encouragement, and support from you. And then remain open to the idea that your youth's life experience are different from yours, even if you share one or more social identity. And we touched on this a little bit, but the fastest way to kind of shut a kid down is for an adult to too quickly suggest that they understand exactly what you're coming from, right? Exactly what you've experienced before the young person is even done sharing yet, right? So we want to be sure not to over-relate with our young people too quickly. You will find your connection points organically. And what I always say is that even if our social identity wheels are, a very close Venn diagram, feels like 80, 90%, the reality is, the difference is, you're your age and they are their age, right? They're all those things right now, right? And you are these things, however, you're many years older right now. We're not young people right now. The only way we can get perspective about their experience is to hear from them directly. So even if we do share a lot of these social identities, our experience with those identities is different just because of when we live through those identities, right? If you were with us last June for our LGBTQ training with Dr. Rommel, he talked about, the history of being a gay man in the 80s, 90s, right? That is quite different than what it is now, even though there are some similarities. So even with the social identities that may be similar, the history of what those things mean as well is important to get to learn for ourselves, for our own identities. What was it like to be, if I think about myself, a neurodivergent, dynamically disabled, Italian person in the 50s versus what it is right now? It would be different. So getting to, again, being curious about our own, what that means, our legacy and history of our identities, but also for our young people as well. What does it mean for them to be this right now? And what is kind of the legacy of that as well, and the history of that? And then in the ideal, we're also learning about our young people's families. So for programs, we've always reiterated that, pardon me, we always reiterate that family engagement is extremely important. And this is one of the reasons why, right? The more we learn about our families, just like our young people, we will be able to be in a better relationship with them, to serve them better, and to be able to provide greater support to them. Any questions about kind of these actions that we want to take as it relates to self-reflection and learning for practicing cultural humility? Yes, so you will.
Okay, amazing. I was gonna ask you to go back to one of the slides, but that's good. So I can look back at it later.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so this, we're going to do a little activity. So this is in the chapter. So when you download this, this is a screenshot directly from the chapter. And it has questions for critical self-reflection and questions for continuing learning about your mentee. What I want us to do is we're going to take a few minutes to write down which questions we want to explore a little bit more. And then we're going to go back into our breakout rooms to kind of talk through some of those questions. So let me pause really quick.